I want to give time, Anna. I know you have things to say and to share.
I'm a very old woman. I am now 93 years old. And so I went through many experiences that you people would have to learn about from the books. And I had lived through some of them, too, not many of them. I was born in Hungary, in a very small, very backward town. There may have been about 4,000 people, mainly peasants. It was a small backward village without electricity, without a high school, a hospital, or any of that. Among these 4,000 peasants, essentially, lived about 40 Jewish families, and we were the middle class, you know, storekeepers and whatnot. That was my father. As Hungarians, if you know the history of Europe, I'm sure of the 20th century, that the Hungary culturally belonged to the German Empire and the Habsburg people. So the language German was very widespread, not again between the peasants, but not among the peasants, but among the intelligentsia, especially in the Jewish people. But I didn't speak any German, I only spoke Hungarian. And because culturally the Hungarians were very closely related to the Germans, they were also politically very close. They were members, they were in the same group. I have to make this shorter, no, forget it. I don't want these details. I just want to say we were protected from deportation until about the end of the war. And that was in 1944. And then they were deported. I was in Auschwitz. My mother and I survived with some difficulty, but we made it. And because Hungary was in the Russian part of Europe, my husband and I, we married very young after the war. We escaped from Hungary, and we were both determined not to leave Europe without an education. So we escaped. We went into we went to Germany and studied medicine there. And we lived a very, very good life here in the United States. We have 3 children. All 3 of them are psychiatrists. 2 of them are psychoanalysts. And I have written and been teaching quite a bit in various places. But after my stroke, which was a year and a half ago, as you can hear from my speech, I had suffered considerable losses. And so it is a little bit difficult for me to bring all together, not the memories. I have my memories, but as I am talking with you now and want to be very brief, it's not so easy for me to do that. So I'm going to stop here. Okay, thank you for listening.
Okay, well, thank you for everything that you share, and thank you for your courage and vision and love. I want to, so I think it would be great if people have comments or questions, or if people that would like to speak, you know, fellow survivors in the community who are on the line would like to come forward, you know, now is an excellent time if anybody wants. While people are waiting, I can just begin by asking Anna a question, which is something we've been talking about a little bit, you know, which is just kind of counsel for young therapists and young clinicians based on your own career and expertise. You know, how do you turn to people who stand in my shoes, and people, you know, people who are working with the refugees of today, people who are tackling issues around the conflicts of climate change? How do you offer a vision of what psychotherapy can be?
You know, there are so many types of psychotherapists. We are not a group of people, we take on certain views of the way to help people. And I am sure you don't think that I or anybody would have at one complete way of putting, now, this is the way to do it. No, this is the way I had learned to do it. It worked for me. But psychotherapy is usually between two people. And they create an experience between the two of them that it has a great deal to do who they are, these two people, and not only of what they are talking about. So my view would be very much in keeping with my theoretical orientation and my personality. And then when I see a patient, I will use a method that I learned to work well, which is empathic listening. No, not every psychotherapist using empathy and the way to learn about the patient's inner life that way. So I can only tell you about my way, which would be that I would give the patient ample time to teach me who or she is, so that we get to know each other and work together. And that is in a very simple way to say, this is the way I think about psychotherapy. This is not necessarily the way many other psychotherapists think about it. They have to learn it that particular way.
What about for you, Sophia? Do you?
Well, I've always thought much the way Anna does. She was a teacher about close to 40 years ago. She and Paul Ornstein, her husband, were teaching self-psychology. And I guess I had, at that point, yes, I had finished my training, which didn't really include self-psychology. So I was inspired by Anna. I thought that Anna and Paul, I thought that the idea of listening to people without approaching them with a theory. I think theory has often been problematic, stands in the way. And Anna's very good at listening, as are, you know, self-psychologists. And so that would be very close to the way that I would work. I want to get to know what the person's about, and you really have to do a lot of listening. And that kind of brings me back to the influence of those early childhood trauma experiences, where I listened a lot. I didn't talk too much. So it's kind of consistent with my with a natural bent that I have. Although I'm not a quiet therapist when I'm working, But I take my cues from the other to see where they are.
I read Sophia's book some time ago, and I was very touched by Sophia's story. And, you know, today when I listen to you again, I mean, I love the idea of resilience, you know, and looking at the resilience of your parents, you know, I love that idea. And when I was listening to you, I was comparing your experience to my very different experience. I was born in Israel, and I know those, I mean, like, I think that I was encountered with people that are like your parents, that with their resilience, they managed to come and to build a country. So I was just thinking and kind of trying to compare the different experience, you know, that I had. And I loved your creativity, you know, and your message to us. So I got it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for looking and observing and seeing.
You know, I feel that this is like a dialogue. When we have an audience, is part of the dialogue. Please, please.
Yes, I just want to say Kusanem. My grandmother was from Hungary, from a very, very small village, Csenger.
Tell us, why did you come to this meeting and what did you want to learn?
My grandmother was from Csenger in Hungary.
Yeah. And you came to listen to this conversation today. And what did you learn? What did you hear?
I learned that, well, I am also an artist, and it was just lovely to hear that both Sophia and Albert, that you're using your art for breathing through your trauma. And I just think it's beautiful because I believe myself, I'm a musician, that this is also what I am doing, because they say trauma passes down 3 generations. And I know how my grandmother's trauma was brought over on my father and from my father to me. So it's generational trauma. And I feel that art and expression, the power of expression and creation, to create something out of anything, even though it is something extremely hard, something very hard to grasp, you know, in dissociation and in anxiety and all of these emotions. And it's so far away, but I think it's so brave that you want to catch all the pieces and
I love
make something that is yours, that no one else can take away from you as an individual who are experiencing this reality right now. So I just want to say I am honored to have listened to all of your stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. and I feel very connected to the past and the present right now, which is very healing for me in my own journey. Thank you.
Well, I was born in Uzbekistan in 1945 and to Polish Jewish parents. And that experience was completely different. Sophia's comments about secrecy and when my parents came to America in 1950, they tore up my birth documents because they were afraid that they weren't allowing Russian nationals into the country, and told me that if I ever told where I really had been born, we would all be deported. And it's shocking when immigrant children today and are faced with the challenges that seem to have come forward. So the opportunity to bear witness, to speak of traumas is really amazing. Thank you all.
Rita, my father was also born in 1945 in Uzbekistan to Polish Jewish parents. And my dad just died in December, but he was from Zamość, Poland. And it's been interesting and a little exhausting just because it's touching so many very real and live chords for me to hear all this, because I grew up with his complex identity of someone who grew up with false papers. And he just actually, I highly recommend, not to keep plugging my dad, but he's dead and it's all I got to give you. But he just wrote a book right before he died and we're editing it. It's coming out called Lies That Matter. It'll be out in December, but it's all about everything we're talking about with concealing identity. And he was a Nazi hunter for the US government in the 70s. And that was his work, was to go and confront the people that actually killed his own family. And my research has always been about inherited trauma. And one thing that you're all making me think more about is, since my father's death, I've been thinking about art as a coping mechanism, and whether art and high intellectual, like I'm feeling a lot of resonance with my own world, which is such a gift. And, you know, he was highly intelligent and highly artistic, but he never moved through the trauma of the war. And so I'm curious, like, when does art and when does high intelligence help us cope with what we're carrying, and when does it help us enter the world we're in? I just feel like there's a boundary there that sometimes works, and sometimes I feel like sometimes his art kept him from us rather than bringing him towards us. But it was his way of reckoning with what he knew in the world.
In what way did it keep him from you?
Because he was so lost and devoted to his own practices of that he never did psychoanalysis, he never did any trauma healing, and he used it as his method of being alive, and he was so alive. He never worked through the trauma, and so I feel that in some ways, I don't know, it kept him going. I was just observing his work and the body of his work and just wondering if all that art was bringing him like anywhere near healing his actual wounds, or if it was just helping him stay with aliveness in a certain, like there was a part of him that never ever got touched. And I just wonder if the art kept him sometimes from having to hit a bottom where he would go to therapy and get some wound assistance with having grown up in a war that shredded him a lot.
The art can develop. I used to do a lot of art that had nothing to do with trauma, but in time, I came to move into that area. I wrote about trauma, but I didn't paint about trauma. And recently, I've kind of worked into that. But I think that, you know, whatever it was, whether it was, he must have been meeting some very important need for him to be so engaged in it. And you know, whether you call that healing or you just call it, you know, a kind of escape, which is also part of, you know, being able to live, to survive when you're hurting.
Yeah.
So I don't think you could distinguish specifically on whether it was, if it met his need, it must have been important. But that's a different story from his being kind of isolated from you because he was so preoccupied with, you know, his own struggle. That's a whole, I think that's a separate issue. But he's left you things to connect you with him.
I was lucky to be with him when he died and see him for the last week. So I feel like he's like the perfect soul of the planet now, because I saw him with nothing, you know. So I don't have any anger. I'm just curious.
I think one thing which has been highlighted between Albert and Sophia, who both talked about art, they talked about it in very different ways, you know, which is Albert, and maybe Albert, you can step in, but what I heard you talking about was, you know, both going beyond catharsis to trying to discover, going beyond self-expression to kind of identify in that almost, you know, a dialectic, a periodicity, trying to identify and use creativity as a way to kind of hone in and gain understanding. And, you know, and I think this represents kind of, you know, a vision of not just, you know, art as a tool of expression, but art really, you know, how do we leverage art as a way to understand ourselves?
Can I say something here?
Please.
Because we grew up about 50 kilometers from each other in Poland, and we met here, of course, afterwards. So I feel very close to Sophia. I'm sorry I missed your talk. I was involved with another conference. But what comes to mind here as we're talking is I have two grown children. They're in their 30s. And my daughter, who was the oldest, seemed to have accepted my past very easily. She knew I was a child in the Holocaust, and she actually wrote about it, and she actually made a film about it, going back to my town. She recorded my town with me. My son, however, did not really accept my history for quite a long time. And it wasn't until he was threatened as a Jew living in Seattle that he became more understanding of my history and more appreciative of what I've been through. So I just wanted to talk about the second generation here a little bit, how we transmit our past and how the kids receive it in such different ways. You have any comments about this, Sophia? Because you have a daughter. And
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about that. It's a very interesting way that she's handled it. One of the disappointments is that she hasn't wanted to read the memoir. And I think that I actually had feelings like that about my own father, not wanting to read his memoir. Eventually, I read it after he died. And then I incorporated his memoir, parts of his memoir that I felt would be important to capture. I incorporated it into my own memoir. So I quote, when he escaped from the concentration camp, I described that whole experience, for example. You know, it's an interesting thing, the way children respond. On the other hand, my daughter doesn't want to read the memoir, but on the other hand, she's a singer, and one of the signature songs that she sings beautifully and often cries when she sings it is the Mauthausen cycle from Theodoricus, and it's about the Mauthausen concentration camp. So that the fact that this would have become her signature song it says something about it. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that, but it's about the grief of losing one's love in the concentration camp. It's a very powerful piece. So it's a complicated response. I mean, here's this ambivalent response in the same person. You've got your two kids that you can compare because they have such a different way of responding and at different times of their lives. But I've got one which combines the kind of internal struggle about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I can touch on that too. You know, I'm drawn to your question. You know, and of course I don't know your children, but I think it's interesting. You know, kind of starting where I was talking about at the very beginning about the legacy of Yom Kippur and this idea of entering into the sanctuary after the death of Nadav and Abihu, which kind of forms the textual reference for what becomes Yom Kippur. You know, in terms, there's something for the young generation, I speak mainly for myself, about there's something very precious of going into these memories, of going into this space, of connecting to this. And that's something that we see, you know, consistently as a bastion of Jewish identity, is like, you know, identifying with being, you know, being survivors or connecting to this identity. So much so that it, you know, it can be a problematic, you know, for sometimes of our looking backwards, you know. So it's, and I wonder if other young people out there, how that resonates with them.
Which part, Maxwell? Which part are you asking about? I'm sorry.
I was responding to what you were saying about your children and, you know, being engaged with your story or not engaged with your story.
I see. Yeah. I think in terms of my children, I think shame had a lot to do with it. My son felt ashamed of my history, and then his inheritance of my history. It's a very inhibiting emotion, shame, and I still feel that often. It comes up for me. I have to kind of, you know, regulate it and think about it so that it wouldn't swamp over me.
I have a friend named Florence Grende who was born in a DP camp after her parents had spent years in concentration camps, and they came to America. She's written a memoir called The Butcher's Daughter, in which she talks about how she perceived her parents and what they shared and didn't share, mostly what they didn't share, and what she had to kind of glean from their behavior about family history. And you know, this kind of generation of children of direct survivors is a whole community where perhaps it's a different kind of trauma than the direct trauma felt by people who actually went through the Holocaust. But I recommend this memoir. It's called The Butcher's Daughter, Florence Grende.
may I say something else about this topic here?
Mm-hmm.
Because it resonates a lot with the story of my father and his mother. My father has not wanting to know anything, not so much. He didn't want to know what happened to his mother, and his entire life he pushed away his Jewishness. He didn't, even his mother, because she was so traumatized from being in the camp, she even baptized him to become Christian and gave him, she didn't go to synagogue or anything for the rest of her life until she had her very, very last years in a Jewish home and had a Jewish burial, and she's in the Jewish cemetery now in Stockholm. But you know, everything has been pushed away so much, and she has her she was telling her story to the Shoah Foundation survivors of the Holocaust. So we have those tapes, and he never showed them to us, and he hasn't watched them himself either. So it has been identity crisis for him, looking like he does and feeling so mixed of everything and doesn't know where he belongs. And this trauma of his has also gotten down in my generation as his child, not really knowing, because he, you know, because he didn't want to feel the Jewish part of his story until I took care of my own healing journey back to Hungary, back to Transylvania, going to Israel, making myself acquainted with this part of me, because I have so much of the Hungarian culture in me, the fire. I have so much of that, and not that makes me feel so connected to that, and I look more like that part of the family and everything. So it's just very, very interesting, this. And a very good friend of mine, she was born into, she was Haredi, and she told me, because she was so sure of her identity, and but she told me that maybe the third generation can heal, be the healers or something. And I don't know, it felt very good for me to hear that, because I think that my healing and my way of going back into the Jewish part of me has also made my father heal a little bit and accept a little bit being Jewish, and having, because he is also scared. He's also scared. And yeah, I don't know, I just wanted to share this because I think it might be common that it's so the wound is still open for the second generation. It's so fresh, and yeah. Thank you. I'm not gonna take all the time, but thank you. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess on that, I really relate to that as a third generation also. I'm Albert's grandson, Max's nephew. And I'm curious, in any of your experiences, if you found similarly, like people who, I know a lot at least in the American kind of Jewish communal memory, the Holocaust is often seen as a point of kind of uniting around shared suffering. But I'm curious if you've seen, and like seeing people have talked about that as a I think it's kind of pushed them away from wanting to identify with the community. But I guess in any of your experiences, have you seen that as kind of I don't want to say a positive inspiration, but whether among direct survivors or their descendants, using that as kind of inspiration to reinvigorate, whether it's religious or social? Have you seen that at all?
It's a nice question you're asking, because my two kids see me just very differently from what you're saying. One of them sees me like you do. My daughter is inspired by my past. She's inspired by what I've done and what I've achieved. So that's inspiration for her. And she wrote about that, actually. My son's inspired too, but only recently has he acknowledged that. Before, it was more of a shaming and inhibiting experience, self-consciousness experience for him. Two very different reactions to it. Did you experience that yourself?
Do I experience that myself? I've been doing a lot of thinking about it lately, having reflections for various classes in school and things like that. But I think I really do hold that part of my identity pretty dear to my heart, and something that I don't think I hide it. I think I almost show it a little bit too much. But it certainly does make me feel more connected to it, whether that be the Jewish community, the people who know what it's like to be some kind of other, I think. And thank you, to the two of you, the three of you, for sharing. Kosanom, dziękuję.
Well, thank you.
Yes, dziękuję.
I guess, Albert, I'm curious how this conversation is landing for you, being that you have your grandson and your son present and sharing their experiences of being second and third generation survivors.
Oops, what happened?
I don't know. We'll just talk. It's okay. We'll find out.
Okay.
There. Okay.
I feel very good to experience the love that is so present in everybody caring. I think the youngest person here is Anna Ornstein, because she has such presence about each one of us. And I think it's a gathering of kindness and community and respecting the healing that we need, that we are so still tormented by all the suffering that is still going on. I preoccupy myself more conceptually than dealing with the actual individual adjustment to the Holocaust, because I think the problems of the world are very universal. And I'm concerned about all of the casualties that we have today in the world, be that as American citizens, be that as people who are wondering, what is right and wrong, and they have to deal with the value systems. And so I love you all. I thank you all for staying on with my technical presentation. I do have a vision for healing the world in a broader way. I think that you're all kind people and supportive, and you see the process of therapy as being human, as facilitating emotional growth. But, my thing is that, like we're in a concentration camp with the Salonika Jews who are trying to still survive in spite of being ongoing Holocaust, that we have to deal today hiding from COVID, but also dealing with abuse from many different kinds. And I don't think that the world is going to get to deal with these problems until we have a scientific moral paradigm. And that is what my life is about. And I feel very lucky to be followed by son and grandsons and potential brides. And I feel very good about being in a world that is in a healing process. We have been traumatized, but we have recovered, and creativity is our healing mechanism, be that when we're asleep or when we're creating poetry.
But, you know, I'll be very honest. I really was very ambivalent to come. I spent so much of my life trying to understand my crazy childhood. We were going from one place to another, being converted Protestant and Catholic and, you know, and Buddhist and, you know, so, but in the end, you know, I managed. But what I wanted to say, which it was about, you know, a few months ago, I'm looking through my stuff, and what do I find? A manuscript. It's called Erica, and I look at it. It's my story about my childhood, which I told in a third person. And it was so poetic. It was so beautiful. I was flabbergasted. First, I thought maybe it was my ghost. And what I found interesting is I heard Abraham Foxman not long ago, and he also said that he was using the third person. And in a certain way, you know, I mean, I could go, I mean, I have a long story, which sometimes I'm trying to joke a little bit about it between all the different religions. So I have to say to the father, the Greek father, that, you know, at Christmas, what I do is I have a singing party with Christmas songs, Hanukkah songs, and Japanese songs, which is my husband. So, you know, there's a lot of confusion. But in some ways, my ambivalence is that I've spent so much time trying to learn, and I've written a lot out of it. And Sophie, I don't know if you remember me.
Of course I do. Of course I remember.
So that was the reason I wanted to come, to hear you, you know, and I think I know you too, you know, Darlene, right? But anyway, so we're in school together, some incredible story like that. But anyway, I was ambivalent because I've spent so much time, and I've written and I've published and I have, you know, and when I finally started to understand what happened to me was through art. And it was through one day I was looking at, you know, a window, and I saw reflections in the window. And suddenly I knew that was me, because there was the two parts of me that I was never able to really put together, you know. And so I started doing a lot of photography, but with, you know, Photoshop. And in fact, I had several shows all over the place. And now my latest thing is that I'm doing images of New York in the clouds, because that's where we are now. It's in the clouds, it's not in reality. So I just wanted to share that with you. But, you know, I realize that there's still a part of me that doesn't totally connect with that other part of me, which is very, very, you know, emotional, and which I could express in the third person. And I've written something, and I'm trying to get it published one of these days. I mean, some people are interested. But so I wanted to share. I don't know if you want me to ask me some questions, or, but it was because I wrote it before. My story, I found families in Israel, well, in the 70s, you know, it took a long time. I really pursued my little spot, you know. And finally, in fact, I found even my uncle, my mother's side, was the only person who survived. I'm going to cry. But so I had written my story, but with my name. And I looked it over. It was not at all the same thing. This other one was the little girl who knew how she felt and who could express it. And I was flabbergasted. So that's what I wanted to say. I mean, if you want to ask me more questions about my past, but it's complicated, you know. Yeah.
I have a little girl climbing on me right now, but I typed my question, but I held back because I didn't want to interrupt the beautiful conversation. I'll put it in because it's very long, but the essence was asking about the healing, or what it feels like when any of you, again, experience it through the eyes of being a child.
But that's what me, you know, I just, I mean, and I really, and then when I want to have it published, I tell people I just don't want anything to change. Of course, I understand they want to correct some of the English, but because it's like betraying the child, and I don't want the child to be betrayed. And so, you know, there's a lot of people who love it, and some people don't like it at all because they think it should be more down to earth and this and that and the other thing. But that's, you know, and I've written poetry also. And you know, the whole issue of art was so important to me because that was the one time I was able to show and tell my story, because otherwise I get embarrassed, you know. And I don't know, who am I? You know, I was a Christian, I was a Jew, I was a Catholic and Protestant and converted in everything. And I was very lucky. At the end, I was adopted by this older couple, and she was an artist herself, and she was a little nuts. You know, she was together with India and Tagore and ashrams, but she was a very good artist, and she had a sense of you know, the innocence of childhood. And that hit with me, and the two of us could become friends, and she helped me a lot, I have to say, even though on the other hand she didn't help me at all because she couldn't stand my growing up and got furious at me. But so, you know, it's a complicated story, but the whole issue of childhood being expressed, and Abraham Foxman said the same thing in some ways the other day, so I thought, you know, I might as well share this. I don't know, I'm a little confused, but what can I say?
No, thank you. It's very powerful. And it's also very powerful to hear it with a child in my lap and think about the perspective, because the one who's on my lap, Sophia, is probably about the age that you were, but to think about the clarity with which you spoke. And the clarity of your experience.
So I'm happy I came, you know, even though I was very ambivalent. So, and it was very nice to hear Sophia, and to this gentleman. You see, with my niece, I can't remember your name. Oh yes,
Albert,
right? That's your. So you see, I got it. You know. So anyway, and I was very touched also by everybody who spoke. So, this is a part of me, and that's it. And the other part is me in the present, trying to, you know, I'm part of this French Society of French-speaking health professionals. I'm the secretary, and right now is a terrible time to do that. And so I'm very involved in that, and I forgot all about the Holocaust, and it comes back. You know, that's it. Thank you.
Beautiful. I guess we're all in it in the long term, but does anybody, maybe we should bid goodnight, but does anybody want to, Lee Moore, do you want to say something? No.
I just feel really grateful to be here and hear the stories and just, just the presence, being together is really special.
You see, it makes me feel more emotional now that I talked about it. So I want to say thank you. I hesitated, you know.
Sorry if I put too much pressure.
Right.
Oh, Anna, you are muted still.
And I have to go now, so.
Okay, Anna's trying to say something, but let's see.
Unmute here. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, Anna.
I just wanted to say that what evolved after people began to talk, that this group, I don't know how many people were here, has a lot to share. What I heard was the need to articulate experiences and to share them with people who are interested and are willing and eager to hear you. So why don't you create a group? Why don't you meet once that you don't have to run because, we have so little time. No, you have plenty time nowadays. And so you get together and you say every 5 o'clock, every other week or whenever, and I will hear these beautiful stories and hear about these people. This is the healing that you get from listening to other people with all of that. So why do we rush? What was the hurry? We want to hear each other. And ever since opened up the conversation, we couldn't stop. 7 o'clock came and is gone, but we should meet again and again or whenever. Why was it 1 hour that we needed to do this?
I'm in. I thank you for that invitation, and I look forward to it. And thank you all for stepping forward and holding close. And it's beautiful to sense these common stories. It's beautiful to hear these different accents and these different voices and these different memories, and yet to hear such commonalities, such a reverberation of a chorus. And I'm very grateful to listen and to hear and to share. And yeah, I look forward to. It seems like people were interested, and if there's a will and a spirit to continue, I look forward to that.
It's very, very moving. Really, very moving.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good
night, everybody. Okay.
Max,
good night.
Thank you for arranging this.
Good night.
Thank you, Maxwell and Albert and Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. And thank you, Albert, for your presentation.
Thank you. Difficult to say good night.
Good night.